Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, I want to talk about the changes to slam skills that are going to be happening in Path of Exile's Harvest expansion in about a week's time. So slam skills are basically melee attacks that are two-hand friendly, not necessarily exclusively two-handed, a lot of them can be used dual wield or even sword and board, and they are generally at the slower end and larger area of effect. So there are strike skills on the one hand. These are things like Molten Strike, where you need to be up close, quite close to the monster. There can be some range bonuses, but generally speaking, you need to be up really close. And then they hit the monster, and if they successfully hit the monster, they'll also proc some additional effect. That's the concept of a strike skill, and some of them include things like Smite and the aforementioned Molten Strike, as well as Heavy Strike, Dual Strike, things like that. Slam skills are somewhat different, and they're getting quite an overhaul. So I want to go through those and also demonstrate the video that GGG put out detailing the changes to slams and how they'll look in practice. But before that, I also just want to quickly cover the other little bits of news that are easy to miss that were revealed on Reddit today. So the first one is a GGG designed unique. This is Fleshcrafter, Necromancer Silks. So these are pure energy shield armor. They're not very good from a defensive perspective. 270 energy shield, and basically nothing else when it comes to protecting your character. So for an endgame player, it's all about the other mods on this item. This is not much of a defensive item, but it's also not complete rubbish. However, minions convert 2% of their maximum life to maximum energy shield per 1% chaos resistance they have. This is a really interesting line. There's a couple of things with it. The first one I need to say is a niche interaction that might be important. If you can get your minions' chaos resistance to 50%, they will die. They will die. They will die instantly. This has been confirmed by GGG over on the Path of Exile subreddit, and I'm sure that there will be some ridiculous builds that take advantage of this. Salutations, Exile. And then additionally, we have chaos damage doesn't bypass minions' energy shield. So essentially, your minions are all wearing Chevron's wrappings. Minions have faster start of energy shield recharge, and then this really interesting line. While minions have any energy shield at all, their hits ignore monster elemental resistances. Now, when I saw this item, I actually really badly misjudged it initially. I thought this last line was amazing. I'm looking at it and going, wow, this is going to be a massive damage multiplier for builds. You're going to go from having your minions doing half damage to the Shaper to instead doing full damage. However, I was pretty quickly corrected when I mentioned this on the Path of Exile subreddit, that I thought this looked amazing because of that last line. When people that have played minions a bit more than I have, and I have not played minions much at all, they pointed out to me that actually I was completely wrong, and this is going to be a net negative to damage. The reason for that is that there is so much elemental penetration available indirectly to minions. This goes by way of applying exposure, which will give generally 10% elemental penetration of a sort. It's not technically elemental penetration, but we'll call it elemental penetration. Elemental equilibrium for 50%, and a curse for maybe around 20%. So all of this combined means that the Shaper doesn't have plus 50% elemental resist. It's more likely to be something like negative 30. Now, when you've got negative 30 to a resist, bypassing elemental resistances is actually a drawback, not a benefit. So for that reason, I'm not that inclined to recommend building around this item. It looks spectacular. The artwork on it, the 3D artwork looks amazing, but I don't think it's going to get there. Anyways, that's the Fleshcrafter. Next up we have the Great Old One's Tentacles, and where Fleshcrafter I think is a miss, Great Old One's Tentacles is going to be a hit. This gives a modest amount of life. 53 life is something, it's not great. Adds a huge chunk of physical damage to attacks. Now, you'll notice that the raw numbers don't seem very high, 9 to 20. However, that's a considerable amount. The reason that physical numbers are generally so low is due to the existence of Facebreaker. Now, this obviously can't be worn at the same time as Facebreaker. They're both gloves. And I think that's why such a powerful item has been put in the glove slot is because this would have been brokenly overpowered in conjunction with Facebreaker, potentially. Anyway, it still is a solid amount of added physical damage that you can then apply all sorts of shenanigans with. Normally, I would be inclined to say the best way to get maximum value out of flat added physical on gloves would be in conjunction with the unique sword Voidforge or with the unique bow Doomfletch Prism. However, I think in this case you're just going to play it straight and use it with a normal unique weapon or rare weapon that just deals standard physical hits. And that's because of these last two lines. Firstly, chance to impale enemies on hit with attacks. Impale chance is easy to come by and easy to 100% on, but you do need to get it somewhere, and this is a source of it. You're going to wear these gloves for their last mod, so it doesn't hurt to pick up the impale chance that you need here, and it may allow you to change the rest of your gearing. Enemies you kill have a 50% chance to apply their impale damage to all nearby enemies. Now, I did a bit of digging into this. My initial gut thought was that if you've hit an enemy 3 times and built up 3 lots of impale damage on it, and that third hit is the fatality, then what this means is that there's a 50% chance that this enemy will transfer as basically a physical damage explosion. All nearby enemies will suffer the total amount of damage that is stored in those 3 impales. And that actually turns out to be correct. That's what this means. It's sort of convoluted wording. In terms of the effectiveness of this, on a typical endgame character that is built around impale shenanigans, about half of your damage will come from impales. Against monsters that are pretty soft, if an enemy can die in one hit, then this is going to cause the death explosion to be somewhat on par with, but a bit less than Herald of Ash. So there'll be scattered damage to enemies nearby, but it will be in proportion to the amount of overkill that you did, but it's not going to be some utterly tremendous amount of damage. So expect it to be like Herald of Ash if you're one-shotting enemies, but for it to be physical damage rather than anything else. However, if you're taking more hits to kill an enemy, you may find that you get more damage out of these explosions than you would out of Herald of Ash. If you're taking 6 or 7 hits to kill an enemy, and let's say you're playing an impale champion that can stack 7 impales, let's say that your first hit deals 10 damage, then 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 is the fatality hit. The amount that you would have stored up in your impales at this point would be about 7 points of damage, which is then going to be dealt to everything around you. That's going to be approximately 1/13 of the monster's hit points. So this is better than an explodey chest, so a Crusader explosion, physical damage explosion chest, against both the weakest monsters and the sort of fairly tanky rare monsters that might take 7 hits. Against monstrously big enemies, say a map boss or whatever, one of those super tanky devourers with extra life and a couple of other mods on it, those ones you're going to find that you would get better results wearing a Crusader explosion chest. However, there's nothing stopping you from wearing both. And I think that people who are able to use the Great Old One's Tentacles will probably also use a Crusader explodey chest as well. All in all, I'm kind of hyped for these, and I think they fit in well with the other stuff that's being discussed on this video, which is slow-hitting, massive damage smash attacks. The other thing that was revealed that was a little bit hidden was the no witnesses. One of the things that was previously a cluster jewel node is being moved to the core skill tree, and that means that it's being added as an entire cluster on the passive tree. I think that this will be one that people will often take. It does nothing against bosses, but it's really good for trash clear. Getting yourself a whole bunch of extra bonuses to elusive is good, and I think that people are going to want to use this. On the flip side, though, assassins can probably do without it because you've got the ability to gain elusive pretty easily from your character, from your ascendancy. Otherwise, though, this just opens up a lot of other, even at high budget characters when you could afford Tailwind and elusive boots, this offers up new gearing options for your boots. So yeah, I think No Witnesses is going to be a good option on the tree. Some people will take it, some people won't, and that's the best thing to come out of an option in the game. However, the thing that's really interesting is this little text. By the way, we're also introducing a new oil. Every notable on the passive skill tree will now be anointable, including all the new ones. So at the moment, there are 12 oils, and if memory serves me right, that is 364 combinations. And there's something like 375 passive nodes now on the tree. With the addition of the 13th oil, we're going from 364 up to 455. So it's exactly a quarter more of them that are available. And this is going to mean that everything on the passive tree will now be anointable. Have no idea whether this new oil will be rarer than the ones that currently exist, so a tier rarer than gold, or whether it will be somewhere in between, or whether just the current rarities will all change. Alright, well, that's enough of the other stuff. Let's talk about the slam changes now. And let's start with the video here. This is a video GGG put out that demonstrates them in action. This is Fist of War support. Anytime you see a red tinge, this is a new support gem that's being added that amps up and empowers slams. So what you saw there is a new skill that's being added. Firstly, the player attacks the ground. That attack on the ground radiates outwards in 5 lines, and each of them ends with a little projectile. Those then explode when they are hit either by a slam or by a war cry. It looks like the explosion's a big damage there. And this is Ice Crash, and holy shit does it look amazing. The reddish tinge on it is from the Fist of War support. So that's the one that makes one of your slams every now and again absolutely massive. That there was the new Sunder. Sunder's being changed. I think it's going to be a mechanical nerf. This is Earthquake. Or was it? No, this is Ground Slam, sorry. This is Ground Slam. I'm considering starting with the Vile version of this because it looks awesome. This here is Earthquake. Now, you'll notice there's absolutely massive AoE on that. Especially when the Fist of War support procs. So Fist of War is a certain number of times that it can proc per minute of play. Or at least, sorry, it's a set cooldown. It's got an internal cooldown. I think this is Perforate, I'm not certain. It's another skill I've never even looked into at all. This is Tectonic Slam. And Consecrated Path, which is the last of them to be shown off here. This has been a popular skill. I've never played any of the teleporty skills, but it's certainly one that people have played and told me they've liked. So let's go through the actual changes that are being made. So firstly, there's the Fist of War support. I thought it was better to show that off than to talk about it first. Essentially, there's an internal cooldown on this support, and if you make a slam when the cooldown is over, so when it's elapsed, then your slam attack will be empowered. Not only will you make the attack, but also your ancestor will make the attack as well. That's that red ghostly figure. And the ancestor's version of the attack will use your stats, but will be much bigger and will deal much more damage. So think of it as a very different, in the way that Mirage Archer gives you an ally that makes additional attacks for you. It's got that similarity, but where Mirage Archer differs is that Mirage Archer is about making a lot of low effort small attacks and just giving you constant damage, whereas this is all about just getting one massive attack. The reason I really like the thought of Fist of War support, one of the weaknesses of slam attacks is that, and that's just any slow hitting two-handed weapon attack, is that you spend a lot of time moving in this game, moving to stay alive, because you're actively dodging enemy attacks. With Fist of War, you will be rewarded for doing that by virtue of the fact that your first attack after you stop moving will probably have the cooldown up on the ancestor, so Fist of War support can go off. This can be used on pretty much all of the slams, including Doriani's Touch, which was interesting. And I think it's going to be something that will, if the numbers are there, it's going to be awesome. If the numbers aren't there, well, they're not there. Additionally, this is going to create a conundrum where you're going to have an incentive to invest into cooldown reduction. I don't know that it's going to be worth doing, but it's something to keep in mind. You might decide that Fist of War support means that, for instance, instead of crafting Tailwind and Elusive on your boots with an Awakener's Orb at high-end gear, you might instead decide that you want Tailwind as one mod, because Tailwind is awesome, and combine that with cooldown reduction. Very similar to how a lot of people gear Cast on Critical Strike Assassins. So, Earthshatter is next. Earthshatter is going to all come down to the numbers. I don't like the look of this skill that much, but I'm open to being proven wrong on it. This is the one that fires out the 5 fissures, and then at the end of each fissure, a spike bursts from the ground and remains for a time. And then these spikes explode, dealing considerable amounts of damage when they're detonated. They're detonated either by a slam or a warcry being used. It can be you or it can be another player, and those will cause them to go bada boom and do lots and lots of damage. So, as we saw in the video, it's an option to go to slam with Earthshatter, then throw a warcry in here and there. But apparently you can also leap slam onto your spikes to set them off as well. So yeah, this could be quite interesting. I'd be interested in leveling with it, except for the fact that it looks like it may struggle to hit enemies that are directly in front of you. One thing I don't like is skills where you can't predict, where you can't rely on them to deal damage to a specific, very dangerous enemy. So for that reason, a little hesitant to league start with this, but by all means, go ahead if you want. Tectonic Slam was next, and it's being reworked somewhat. It's still fundamentally pretty much the same skill, except that now it's every third slam it will eat one of your endurance charges, and it will become a more powerful attack as you have more endurance charges. To use Tectonic Slam, you're going to want to play a Juggernaut probably, although you can certainly manage it with a Chieftain, because you're going to need passive endurance charge generation, and you're going to need a lot of it. Additionally, you're going to want to have a tanky character if you're a Juggernaut, because you're going to need to take those initial hits every now and again. I've tried Tectonic Slam in the past, and the issue that I had with it was that it was often missing enemies directly in front of you. They did say that there's some changes that will make it a bit more predictable where these cracks land, and that makes me interested in the skill. Additionally, it has some quite interesting shenanigans with Ruthless support at the moment. Ruthless support is a gem that causes every third of one of your attacks to be scaled up considerably, and with Tectonic Slam already amping up 1 in every 3 of your attacks, there's quite a bit of synergy there if you can line them up. In order to line them up, all you need to do is make an attack but cancel it, and that will increment Tectonic Slam's counter, but will not increment the counter on Ruthless. So you can then get them back into line, and then every third attack will be the one that's big from Tectonic Slam's point of view, and you can link that up with Ruthless so that they're big at the same time. This will give you more DPS overall. Perforate. Perforate now provides flat physical damage that scales as the gem levels. This is going to be a good thing. These sorts of sources of flat physical damage often point me in the direction of Facebreaker, and we'll come back to Facebreaker later because I'm not sure if you can use it with Perforate, but there's some juicy things you can. However, flat physical damage that scales as the gem levels, this helps you function on a build if you've got a terrible weapon. The distribution of its spikes in Blood Stance has been made more consistent. A higher percentage of its spikes should hit a small target, and investment in AoE and or the number of spikes should keep this percentage of spikes hitting consistent. Now, again, this is one of those skills that I believe, and I've never played it, I believe it has issues with monsters sort of sometimes being in between the areas that the skill hits. I'm really not a fan of close range skills that a monster can sort of hide from, even if they've got no way of deliberately hiding, they just do it by chance, because it always comes up that you'll wind up dying to that in some stupid way. And anyways, yeah, so there's a little bit more talked about with some other changes when you're in Sand stance or when you're in Blood stance. Other people will probably play this skill. I've got no intentions of it because I really just don't know enough about how it works. Next up we have Sunder. So Sunder has been changed considerably, and they're saying here, as part of our effort to encourage slower and heavier hitting slams, Sunder has become a much wider and longer but slower cascade. This sets off alarm bells for me in terms of usability. Sunder has been good in the past as a melee skill. In fact, for a whole period, it was considered the best way to speed level a character. This changed with the introduction of Stormbrand a few leagues ago, and Sunder hasn't really been all that popular since. But it was still pretty good. It was sort of always, a top 5 skill for leveling a character quickly. But one of the things with that was that the damage projection was good, including at low level, and that the damage projection was fast. It looks like Sunder is losing that benefit of fast damage projection and exchanging it for slightly larger overall damage projection. So, Sunder is now a wider and longer but slower cascade. Using Sunder while one cascade is still in motion will cause the existing cascade to end prematurely. These cascades will always travel a minimum length, so you can still use Sunder effectively with multi-strike and fast-hitting weapons when close to enemies. So what we've got here is an interesting setup where there's a tension between attack speed, which is normally one of the best stats you can possibly scale on an attack build, and your area of effect. Raising your attack speed will be lowering your area of effect on this skill. This is something that hasn't really existed except on the skill Earthquake in the past. An Earthquake, it's not a tension between attack speed and area of effect, it's attack speed and damage. I'm not sure how it's going to play out, but generally speaking, I'm a little bit hesitant to run a skill that you need to make your attack, then wait a period of time before making the next one, because it gives the sort of small enemies that aren't very dangerous on their own, but that are dangerous in big numbers, it gives them the ability to really seriously whittle you down. Now, I could be wrong, it could be the case that Sunder performs better than that, than I expect, but I'm not really holding my hopes too high on it. Anyways, next up we have Earthquake, Ground Slam, and Ice Crash, which are getting numerical changes, which are not finalized yet. And in general, the idea is to make them generally stronger. I like this term, generally stronger. What I am reading into that is that the best case uses of some of these skills, such as in conjunction with Facebreaker for Earthquake, when we get to the Facebreaker changes later, that those will be held in check by some means. Now, I don't know how they're going to do that, whether it's changing Earthquake's added physical damage to only apply to armed attacks, whether it's just nerfing the hell out of Facebreakers. There's a lot of different options that they've got, and we'll find out that information in patch notes or around that time next week. Other slam skills. The other skills that are categorized as slams are mostly unchanged, but have had their visuals improved and can be used with Fist of War. Oh, and then there's this hidden line down the bottom. Oh, and before you go, you should also know that Ground Slam, Sunder, and Earthquake can also be used unarmed. Enjoy. So the reason that Facebreaker is such a tricky item for game balance is that it causes all sources of flat physical damage to be multiplied, depending on the roll. Let's say that you're using a 770% one. It causes all sources of flat physical damage that you can get from gem levels, from flat physical damage on steel rings, or on various unique items. It causes all of those to be multiplied by 8.7. So these are the reasons that steel rings offer so little in the way of their implicit, why the numbers on it are so small. It's because of the existence of Facebreaker. Steel ring isn't balanced based upon its ability to amplify your damage on a normal build. It's balanced around the existence of these gloves. And the decision to make Ground Slam, Sunder, and Earthquake usable unarmed is going to definitely come in and be a bit of a factor here. I don't know how they're going to handle the balance issues, but I would definitely keep your eye on Facebreaker. It may well be that it is the best set of gloves to use on every melee build. It may be that Facebreaker outclasses all melee weapons next league. Or, of course, it may just not get there. The changes of Ground Slam, Sunder, and Earthquake may not push you towards using Facebreaker. Anyways, I think that's enough coverage of this. If you've got any comments or questions, fire away below. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there. I hope you have a good one.